Everyone knows the story. Mansa Musa. The richest man in history. The African king who supposedly possessed so much gold that when he entered Cairo, he disrupted the value of the metal itself. He gave gold away like it was worthless. He traveled with enormous caravans. He built mosques. He supported scholars. And he became one of the most famous rulers in African history. But there is a question that is rarely asked. Where did all that wealth come from? Because Mansa Musa did not create that fortune out of thin air. He inherited a powerful empire. Then expanded it. He controlled trade. He collected taxes. He benefited from gold. And he ruled over a society where slavery and conquest were part of the political and economic system. The gold was real. The wealth was real. But underneath the gold was a much darker story. To understand Mansa Musa's wealth, you first have to understand Mali. The Mali Empire was one of the most powerful states in medieval West Africa. Its territory stretched across enormous parts of the Western Sahel. And its position gave it access to some of the most valuable trade networks in Africa. But Mali's greatest advantage was not simply the land. It was what was coming out of the land. Gold. West Africa was one of the world's great gold-producing regions. Gold from regions such as Bambouk and Beret moved through networks that connected West Africa to North Africa and the wider Mediterranean world. And whoever controlled the routes could control an enormous amount of wealth. Mansa Musa inherited that system. But he did not simply sit on a mountain of gold. He used the power of the empire to control how that wealth moved. Mali was an empire. And empires grow through power. During Mansa Musa's reign, Mali expanded its influence over important territories and trading centers. Military campaigns brought new lands under Malian authority. And when a powerful empire conquered a region, it could demand tribute. That tribute could come in the form of goods, resources, or other forms of wealth. The expansion of Mali therefore expanded the economic base available to its rulers. This is one of the first uncomfortable truths about Mansa Musa's wealth. Some of the resources flowing toward his court came from territories that had been brought under imperial control. The wealth of the empire did not simply belong to one peaceful kingdom. It was connected to a system of conquest, tribute, and political domination. There is another misconception about Mansa Musa. People sometimes imagine that he personally owned every gold mine in West Africa. That is too simple. The reality was more complicated. Gold was produced by different communities and moved through different networks. The Mali state gained enormous power from its ability to control important routes, tax trade, receive tribute, and regulate the movement of valuable resources. The ruler therefore sat at the top of a system that converted the wealth of a huge region into imperial power. And that distinction matters. Mansa Musa's wealth was not simply the result of finding gold. It was the result of controlling a system through which gold became wealth. Then there was salt. Salt was one of the most important commodities in the medieval Sahara. It was essential for preserving food. And it was transported south across enormous distances. Gold moved north. Salt moved south. And the Mali Empire sat in the middle of this enormous commercial network. Every caravan crossing the empire represented an opportunity for taxation and political control. Merchants paid. Traders paid. Goods moving through the empire could be taxed. And the wealth accumulated at the center. This is how an empire turns geography into money. Mali did not need to produce everything itself. It needed to control the roads, the markets, the political territories, and the trade flowing through them. And Mansa Musa stood at the top of that system. And then there was slavery. And this is where the story becomes darker. Slavery existed throughout medieval West Africa. People could be captured during warfare. Communities could be subjected to imperial power. Enslaved people could become part of households. Agricultural systems. Military structures. And other forms of labor. People were also traded across the Sahara. The Mali Empire existed within this wider system. And that means the story of its wealth cannot be separated completely from the institution of slavery. But we have to be precise. We should not claim that every piece of gold possessed by Mansa Musa was directly mined by enslaved people. The historical evidence does not allow us to make such a simple statement. The more accurate picture is more complicated. Mali's economy was supported by agriculture, trade, taxation, tribute, gold, and systems of slavery. Mansa Musa ruled at the top of that system. And he benefited enormously from it. Imagine the Mali Empire from the perspective of the royal court. Gold is arriving. Merchants are moving across the Sahara. Taxes are being collected. Tribute is coming from territories under imperial control. The ruler has access to extraordinary wealth. But now, move away from the palace. Look at the ordinary farmer. The caravan worker. The trader. The conquered community. The person whose land has been absorbed into a growing empire. The person captured during warfare. The person who has been forced into a system they did not choose. The empire could be wealthy. Without everyone inside it being wealthy. That distinction is crucial. Mansa Musa's personal wealth tells us about the power concentrated at the top of the Mali Empire. It does not tell us that everyone living inside Mali experienced the same prosperity. This is why the modern comparison of Mansa Musa to a billionaire can be misleading. A modern billionaire's wealth can be measured through companies, stocks, property, and financial assets. Mansa Musa's wealth was fundamentally different. He was a monarch. His power came from his position at the top of a political system. He controlled territory. He controlled taxation. He controlled military power. He influenced trade. And he commanded access to the resources of an enormous empire. His wealth was therefore inseparable from his political authority. The king was wealthy. Because the kingdom was powerful. And the kingdom was powerful. Because the king controlled the system. Then came 1324. Mansa Musa traveled to Mecca. And for the first time, the wider world got an extraordinary glimpse of the wealth concentrated at the top of Mali. Medieval accounts describe an enormous caravan. Thousands upon thousands of people. Soldiers. Officials. Scholars. Servants. And enslaved attendants. And everywhere the caravan went, gold appeared. Musa spent it. He gave it away. He distributed it. And in Cairo, the effects became impossible to ignore. The flood of gold contributed to a major decline in the value of gold in the city. The story spread. A ruler from West Africa had arrived. And he possessed so much wealth that his generosity had economic consequences. But there was something else hidden inside that spectacle. The pilgrimage did not create Mansa Musa's wealth. It revealed it. The gold that astonished Cairo had come from the economic and political system of Mali. The mines. The trade routes. The taxation. The tribute. The empire. And the people who lived inside that system. Today, you will often see Mansa Musa described as being worth $400 billion. Or even more. But we need to be careful. There is no reliable way to calculate his personal net worth in modern dollars. Those figures are modern estimates. They are useful for illustrating the extraordinary scale of his wealth. But they are not historical measurements. We don't know exactly how much gold Mansa Musa personally possessed. And more importantly, we cannot separate his personal wealth cleanly from the wealth of the empire he ruled. He was the Mansa, the emperor. The wealth at his disposal was connected to the power of the state. So perhaps the better question isn't, how many billions was Mansa Musa worth? The better question is, how much power did he control? And that brings us to the uncomfortable part. Mansa Musa's wealth was not the product of one magical gold mine. It was the result of an entire imperial system. Conquest created territory. Territory created tribute. Trade created revenue. Taxation created wealth. Gold created enormous international demand. And slavery existed within the society and wider economy. All of these systems connected. And Mansa Musa stood at the top. That does not mean he was uniquely evil compared with every ruler of his time. Slavery existed across much of the medieval world. European kingdoms practiced it. North African states practiced it. Middle Eastern societies practiced it. African kingdoms practiced it. Mali was part of that world. But understanding historical context does not mean ignoring historical consequences. People were captured. Communities were conquered. Labor was controlled. Wealth was concentrated. And the extraordinary riches of the royal court existed alongside ordinary people whose lives were far less glamorous. This is why the popular image of Mansa Musa is incomplete. The internet shows us the king holding gold. The medieval maps show us the king holding gold. The stories show us the king giving gold away. But almost nobody asks, who produced the wealth? Who controlled the trade? Who paid the taxes? Who provided the labor? Who lived under the empire's rule? Those questions do not erase Mansa Musa's achievements. He supported Islamic scholarship. He sponsored architecture. He strengthened Mali's international reputation. And he helped make Timbuktu one of the great centers of learning in medieval Africa. But those achievements existed alongside the harder realities of empire. Power. Conquest. Taxation. Inequality. And slavery. So, was Mansa Musa a villain? Not exactly. And that is what makes the story interesting. History is rarely that simple. Mansa Musa was not a modern billionaire. He was not a modern politician. He was not a humanitarian leader. He was a 14th century emperor. And he behaved within the political world of his time. He conquered. He ruled. He taxed. He accumulated wealth. He used that wealth to build. And he used his power to strengthen Mali. The question is not whether we should turn him into a villain. The question is whether we are willing to look beyond the gold. Mansa Musa became famous because the world saw his wealth. But wealth is never just a number. Behind every empire, there is a system. Behind every system, there are people. And behind the gold were mines, trade routes, caravans, taxes, tribute, conquest, and enslaved people living within a society where human beings could be treated as property. That is the part of the story that gets lost when we reduce Mansa Musa to the richest man who ever lived. Mansa Musa's wealth was real. His empire was powerful. His pilgrimage was extraordinary. His influence was enormous. But the gold did not appear from nowhere. It came through a system. A system built on the control of territory. The taxation of trade. The extraction of resources. The power of the state. And a society in which slavery existed. Mansa Musa stood at the very top of that system. And that is the darker side of his wealth. Not that he somehow possessed a magical fortune. But that his enormous wealth was inseparable from the power of an empire. An empire built by conquest. An empire enriched by trade. An empire positioned above some of West Africa's greatest sources of gold. And an empire where wealth and power were concentrated at the top. So the next time you see the famous image, Mansa Musa, sitting on his throne, holding gold, remember the question most people never ask. Not, how rich was he? But, how did he become that rich? Because sometimes, the darkest part of a fortune is not how much it is worth. It is what had to happen for someone to own it.